Real Talk, USA.
It's my house, come on, turn it up.
The hour where the U.S. mission to the African Union comes to you through Afro FM 105.3 to highlight the United States partnership in Africa. Current issues will be discussed. Guests will engage on a variety of topics ranging from politics to jazz. Co-hosted by Afro FM and Chris Meade of USAU. The show will air every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. Feel free to participate by sending messages to the USAU social media sites, www.usau.usmission.gov or www.facebook.com/USAU and follow USAU on twitter.com/USAU.
Just relax. Welcome to my house.
Real Talk, USA.
Welcome to my house. It's my house.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another segment of Real Talk USA. This is your host for this evening, Mazgawat Haddasa, and I am here with Régine Romain.
Very good, that is correct. Yes.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Romain, for being on Real Talk USA, for agreeing to be with us on this show. And today we have a very interesting topic that we want to talk about. But before we start getting into the topic of the day, if you can say a little bit about yourself, tell us a little bit about where you're from, what you do.
Sure. Well, first I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor. My name is Régine Romain, and I am the daughter of Haitian immigrants in the United States. My family immigrated to the United States in the 1960s, and I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, in the suburbs, and went to Bowie State University, which was really important for me. It was really important for me. I made the choice to attend a historically black college and university because my family being Haitian immigrants, there was a connection but also a disconnection to the African American experience. Mm-hmm. And I found that my family spoke Creole and spoke French and of course English, but I found that there was this place where politically and socially there was a division. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about the African American experience. I wanted to learn more about the history. And so I went to Bowie State University, and there I became an international studies, communications, anthropology major. My work is grounded in exploring the African diaspora. I'm an artist, educator, and visual anthropologist. And from my work at Bowie State University, I was able to get a research grant, and visit Africa for the first time. And that was wonderful. That was in 1994, and I had a chance to visit Ghana.
Okay.
And then from there, just of course traveling all over the world. But it was as a student that I was introduced to the work of Zora Neale Hurston. Okay. And Zora Neale Hurston was an African American folklorist and anthropologist. And her work celebrated the black experience, celebrated it in the way that we were. She wasn't trying to dress us up and make us other than what we were, meaning that often an experience of enslaved people and their descendants, there's a space in which assimilation is key for success. Yeah. And so her work looked at who we were, striving to be outside of that context, right? So outside of trying to assimilate into the dominant culture, who were we when we were amongst ourselves? What were the stories that we told? What were our beliefs? Why did we still carry these spiritual and religious traditions? And how did they survive? And so she became like my spiritual godmother, right? And she's definitely a luminary. And I said, okay, I want to be an anthropologist. And it was when I was in college that I learned a story that had been told to me by my aunt, Tante Rosemary, who was, in my family, she would be considered a samba. Okay. A samba is a storyteller.
Okay.
And she was the one who told so many stories about Haiti's independence, Haiti's fight against the French, the British, the Spaniards, against American imperialism. Very proud of her heritage, and very much engaged in keeping the tradition going. And so she had told me the story of Wakaima, which was a ceremony that took place, ceremony and congress that took place before the commencement of the fight for independence, right? So that was a 14-year battle from that date, which was August 14th, 1791, to January 1st, 1804. That was 14 long years. And so she was the first person to tell me about that story, but then when I got to college, I was able to study it even more.
Yeah.
And in that space, as a student, I found that the date of the ceremony in Congress was actually my birthday.
Oh.
Which I didn't know, right? I mean, in all the stories that she told, the dates, I just don't ever remember that. And then it just deepened my curiosity.
Yeah.
It deepened my curiosity to learn about Haiti, but it also deepened my curiosity to learn about voodoo. My parents themselves, at that time when I was growing up, were not necessarily practitioners. They understood some of it and acknowledged it and had engaged in various practices or traditions, maybe as children. But in my upbringing, my parents had decided to become Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
Which was very interesting. Jehovah's Witness and Haitian immigrants. So, in that space, I wanted to learn what was good, what was bad about voodoo. How could voodoo have been significant, had played a significant role in our independence, but yet is demonized by the world, right?
There's a huge misconception. The people who do know about it, I think, consider it not like a spiritual or religious entity. It's more. I was doing research for this interview, and I was completely taken with what it actually is, because the misconceptions I've had from movies, from the things that I knew from what I read, it was more like black magic as opposed to an actual religion practiced by people.
Absolutely.
So, as an educator,
yes.
I ask you to educate us on what voodoo is.
Yeah, I mean, I want to take that term of black magic and I want to liberate it.
Okay.
I want to liberate it, and understanding that every culture has magic.
Yeah.
And so as a black person, if I have black magic, why would that be bad?
It's interesting that you say that, because the way I, for example, understand black magic is a magic that is used to harm others.
Yes.
And so any religion, I refuse to believe, would be supporting this. So what is your take on this?
So for one of the things that we have to think about is we have to think about the history of words. We have to think about the ways in which blackness and African has been used.
Okay.
Black is always considered to be bad. Right? So for instance, Black Friday, right?
Yeah.
Well, we can just add black to anything, right? And it becomes negative.
Yeah.
Right? So in essence, I claim black magic as a black person, that I have it. Black girl magic, which is a hashtag that's very popular. Why did that become popular?
What is it?
And basically, the hashtag of black girl magic is basically claiming the space as a black person and refusing the negative connotations of blackness.
Okay.
Empowering girl, and then embracing that unknown element which is considered to be magic.
Hashtag
Black Girl Magic. Okay?
Awesome.
And so in that space, and in considering that, I mean, you can just look that up, and you'll find everything, and everybody is using it. I think even Michelle Obama, has used the term Black Girl Magic. Okay. Right? And so in that space, when we think about it, in reclaiming our blackness, we have to reclaim our blackness from those who have written and have told stories that have negated who we are. That's the reason why that I very much do this work as a photographer, as a filmmaker, as a writer, and as an educator. And as a researcher, because we continue to iterate the same philosophies that negate,
we follow,
right? And so in that consideration of what is black magic is that is considered to be this, and then white magic is what?
Is there such a thing?
Yes.
Actually, it's just magic or black magic.
Right, exactly, right? But the putting of the black on it.
Yeah.
Right?
Means,
what does that speak to?
That's so interesting. I've never thought. Also, I mean, being raised as an Ethiopian, magic is like a no-no. You know, it's forbidden. It's not something you practice, at least openly. It's not done, or it is done under the guise of some religion.
Right.
So it's for me, even magic, regardless of whether it's black or white,
or whatever,
is like a no zone, no territory. No, it's forbidden.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting though. Because of this, I've never actually thought about the differences, you know, black magic, white magic, in general.
Right, magic in general. And so for me, in the way that I interpret magic is in essence, to me, has a similar definition to faith. Faith,
miracle,
right?
Yeah,
that is what
extraordinary.
That is in essence what it is, right? And some people, of course, look at magic as the manifestation that someone can make magic or magic tricks, you know, those types of things. Like it seems like it's this, but it's really not. It's only because you don't know, right? But for me, when I think about the larger context of it, right, it is grounded in a space of faith and in miracles. And every religion, every spiritual tradition believes in miracles.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because prayer within itself, prayer to an entity that we are not physically able to see, but we believe deep within our core exists. We have signs. Whether other people believe it or not, we, right, as believers, know that there have been signs. There are stories that are told to us time and time again of this disciple, of this individual that had hardship. But staying the course, guess what? A miracle happened. That is the essence of the way that I see black magic. Black magic is a form of resistance against the forced ideology of white, I see it as inferiority, but it's really, some people would say it's a belief of supremacy, but really it isn't that, because if you have to push upon the world that you are supreme, then you're not. You're not.
That's true.
Right? You don't have to do that, right? You can be and we can be. But that pushing of one philosophy, and that is what has happened to the continent of Africa, and with that the dispersal of Africans through the transatlantic slave trade.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that was also something I was going to move forward to, because we are celebrating commemorating this year the 400th anniversary of the transatlantic slave trade, and we have had Bishop Claude Alexander from the U.S. From Charlotte in the U.S. Talking about the transatlantic slave trade. But if you can say a little bit again now in relation to what we are going to talk about.
Sure. So the transatlantic slave trade, and many people feel that it's a misnomer, because why put all of that on the Atlantic Ocean? The Atlantic Ocean had nothing to do with it, right? It's like, why am I involved in this story? You know what I mean? Like, how is it my fault? But anyway, I mean, basically, the transatlantic slave experience, really, it was based upon European greed, right? It began with they say that it began with the Portuguese. 1619 is supposedly the first arrival of captured Africans to the Americas in Virginia, right? Now, one thing that I think is important, and when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, is that many times in reading it, you will always hear the word slave, 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 slave. With that continued use of that word, we dehumanize people. We take we take away that very important element, and that is intentional. That's one thing I do want to let you know, as a person that has studied this for quite some time. It is intentional. So for me, it is also intentional when I call those that were captured Africans, because that's what they were. right?
True. It was against their will.
Exactly.
It was, yeah.
And they were prisoners of war because there were neighboring nations that were fighting against each other that would capture and then sell. So they were prisoners of war. And most importantly, they were enslaved. Okay? They were not slaves in that sense. Yes, we could say that, oh, they were slaves, but in the sense of recognizing their humanity, let's be clear about the language that we use. And so, due to European greed and African duplicity, right? Engagement with West African nations, who had their own form of slavery, but they really had no idea what the Europeans were doing. They would sell them, and unfortunately, it was for things that were really of no significance. Tropes, okay? Mirrors, guns, gunpowder, whatever it was that the West was bringing, Africans were falling for it. And I must say that it's still sad to see that repeated history, even in modern times. Right? We have to be clear about our relationships, our negotiations of our country, our land, our space, our people, right? And that we're not in a space of rushing to shift and shape to become other, right? Or for others. And so with that, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Spaniards, the British, the French, quite a few European nations were engaged with the West, and specifically where my ancestors are from, they're from the region that was Dahomey, that's known as Dahomey, which is now Benin, and also Nigeria, right? And so with that, captured Africans were taken and forced onto ships, right? And they endured what is called the Middle Passage. And the Middle Passage is an experience that I've read about, but really very few have been really able to kind of document it in the sense of the fullness of what that experience was, where humans were put in or considered to be cargo, right? To be cargo, and were stuffed in inhumane conditions at the belly of the ship, at the bottom. They were stuck in the ship, defecating in the space where they slept. Women were raped right in front of their countrymen or other strangers. Right? Children were bearing witness to this. Children were ripped from their mothers. Right? Abusing. Also the rapes of men. It was not just women. Men and women were raped. And there were rebellions. I think it's important that we discuss that there were rebellions, and it was not only the Amistad ship. Right. This is the one that was made into a Hollywood film, but there were many rebellions that took place. And some were successful and many were not. And those that were rebellious were thrown over the ship and eaten by sharks. Right? And so it's important to note that many of the Africans that were captured and pushed off, the priests and priestesses of those towns would say prayers over them and force them to incant that they would never return. Force them to say in ritual fashion and to be engaged in a type of spiritual brainwashing that they would never return. Specifically in Dahomey, they had to walk from a place that was known as the Place de Chacha, and they had to walk in chains, in mud, in rain, in scorching heat, right? Which I don't think you guys know about here in Addis. Maybe in other parts of Ethiopia, but not here, because it's pretty cool here.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
But the scorching heat of West Africa, and they had to walk 4 miles, known as the Route de Esclave, the route of the slave, right? And they had to walk from there and were taken on canoes onto the ships. So if you can imagine the trauma that already existed for those captured Africans and then being put into those ships, then, not only then on the ships, and for many of them, overwhelmed by the immensity of the ocean. Yeah. Because if you understand that many people that grow up inland
don't have any idea what
the ocean is. They don't know what the ocean is. They might know a lake, they might know a river, but the immensity of the ocean is within many mythologies, right? Many stories. It's very great and scary. So then, you know, the sickness that people feel on a ship, right? That's natural. You go on a cruise and you're getting a little seasick, right? No one cared. The ships were overloaded, knowing that a certain percentage would die because they were just seen as cargo. And so from that experience, then landing in the Americas, landing in the Caribbean, and later being taken to Europe. But most of the intention was to go to the Caribbean and to North and South America and to work on plantations. The experience that Haitians had was under French rule. And the French had something called Le Code Noir, the Black Code. Within the Black Code were the rules that plantation owners, right, would use in managing their Africans. One of the first things that was on the list is that they were not allowed to practice their religion. Anyone caught practicing anything other than Catholicism could be publicly hung, could be whipped, could be castrated, could be burned before others. So the reason why this work for me, this investigation into voodoo, is very significant because of the intentional dismantling of black people and with their culture. I want you to just consider for a moment being in this experience where not only have you been terrorized and torn from your family, your tradition, your culture, and your language. Now you're put on a land where you're forced to work. You're forced to work very few hours of sleeping. In conditions, Haiti, the Caribbean, is very, very hot, right? In very bad conditions. And so the rate of, in the sense of how long people lived, like people didn't live, when we talk about someone living up to being 100 or someone living lifespan, right? Not in that sense because they were seen as just a commodity. And so for me, the story of Haiti is significant. It's significant because it is the first free black republic in the Western Hemisphere. It is the first African state outside of Africa because it was Africans who created Haiti. And so there is a connection, that resistance, that place in which people had to fight.
I recently saw this very short clip. I think it was sent to me on WhatsApp, and it was about the Black Bible. And it said that it actually had fewer chapters than the Bible that we all know.
Yes.
Because it took out those verses and passages
about fighting,
about fighting,
liberation,
exactly, and even about I forget the actual verse, but it took out a verse that said, "Thou shalt not make someone else work without wages." Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, when we think about this, I mean, it's very significant because what we have to understand is that no matter how we may think of others, in the sense when we think about, like in the relation to voodoo and all these things that we're told about black magic and being bad and it's the dark arts and all these different types of things, we have to consider a place in which the religion that was handed to people was part of the oppression.
That's what right? Not only did you not practice what you believed,
yes,
it was also what was given to you instead was not the real deal, at least.
It wasn't the real deal, and it was specifically intended to keep Africans submissive, to keep them in a submissive state. So that is one of the reasons why in the Haitian Revolution, that Black Bible, those ideas, those thoughts had to be thrown out.
It's so interesting to me that despite it all is how Haitians actually started fighting. It's because once something is given to you as religion and you take it up as faith, it is very difficult to fight it.
Yes.
And it's so interesting to me that despite the Black Bible, Haitians rose up against the conditions that they were in.
But also I want you to consider if you were given a religion that was not maybe the religion of your parents, but you were sitting in the lap of luxury from this religion, you were benefiting, you felt good, then you would think, well, this God is better than my parents' God, in the sense of how we just look at things, right? Right, and the reason why the revolt was full-bodied, right? It was a full-bodied of mind, body, and spirit, was that they could see that this that you're giving me is bull. Okay, this is crap. I cannot continue to take your whip and take your Bible.
Exactly, yeah.
And so part of that ceremony, Waka Iman, that took place in the woods, it was a congress also. It was a calling of captains, leaders, soldiers from every part of the island and other islands. Bookman Dutty came from Jamaica. He was called Bookman because he always carried the Quran. Cecile Fatima was the head priestess, and they both were in positions of authority at this Congress. And in that time, there were promises that were made, and there were sacrifices. There was an imploring of those gods and those traditions that each of these nations came from. One of the reasons why many Haitians actually know where they came from is because of the survival in voodoo.
How did it survive?
It survived within the ceremonies that happened, that these folks that were from over here, that were from the Congo, these that were over here that were from Dahomey, their languages, the songs, so the community respected those traditions, and the ceremonies had to include them. So the rhythms that were played on the drum, they knew this rhythm meant that now this is happening.
Yeah.
So we can call the nations, many of them that we descended from. We know that we are from Guinea, that we are Igbo, that we are Congo, that we are Nago. We know because we can call those nations, because within our spiritual tradition, we honored them. Voodoo, at its essence, it is about honoring those who came before. It is about honoring your ancestral tradition. It is not turning your back on your blackness. Though everything and everyone has told you that black is bad. Your skin is bad. Your hair is bad. Your lips, your backside. But yet today, everybody wants a bigger booty. Okay? People are filling their lips with collagen. Right? Just an understanding, like who we are. And so there's a place also in pride. That voodoo is also about pride. Whether you practice it or not, I don't have to practice it to be proud of it. I don't have to practice it to understand that this is my culture. This is a part of who I am. And this is a part of my liberation. And actually, it is only through voodoo that I and all of us descendants of Haiti could even return. If it had not been for voodoo, I could not have this conversation with you today. I wouldn't be here. Right? And so, as a student in college, I just wanted to find out, well, what makes it good? What makes it bad? And what I found is that many people were looking at the negative actions of individuals in performing of bad juju or bad magic, right? Of taking that aspect, which unfortunately exists around the world. I mean, to be quite honest, it exists everywhere. When you speak bad of your neighbor, when you use your mouth and you use the element of wind, right? A big part of what voodoo is actually a connection to nature, right? And so understanding elemental magic, whether we understand that it is magic or not, or in the sense of manifestation, if the word magic is troubling, but in the sense that we are always using elements. When we light our candles and say our prayers, we are igniting our prayer with fire and onto something that is stable. And as that candle disintegrates and evaporates and moves now into air element, now our prayer is on the wind. It has moved from this static form of the candle when we go before our saints, when we go before the different deities that we call upon, right? And we say our prayers, and we light the fire, which is like, this is our prayer, whether we're praying for somebody to get better, or we're praying for a job, or we're trying to get a house, or whatever it is that we're dealing with. We are in a space of faith We're in a space that this can happen. And it is simple as igniting a candle and releasing ourselves, our human selves, into a space of spiritual connection. And allowing those deities, those saints, the God, the Almighty that we believe in to be a part of the manifestation of the miracle that we're asking for.
Yeah. And I feel like that would be easy enough to understand for any religion, any person following any faith. Absolutely. And it seems pretty common in most of the big religions that we know about. For our listeners, I have been watching a movie, a small film that you produced and directed. I think Brooklyn to Benin.
Brooklyn to Benin, a voodoo pilgrimage.
And first, tell us a little bit about that, and I can ask some questions from.
Absolutely. So Brooklyn to Benin, a voodoo pilgrimage, is a manifestation of many years of studying the survival of voodoo. My question as an anthropologist, my question as a daughter of IET, my question as a great granddaughter of Africa, is what is this faith, and how is it that though it faced oppression for over 400 years, how did it survive?
Against all odds.
Against all odds. Against all the Hollywood films, against all of the laws, all the different things that have been created, right? People being killed, all types of things, horror, right? How did it survive? And so Brooklyn to Benin looks at the survival of voodoo in Brooklyn, throughout the southern parts of the United States, going all the way into Belize. I did a road trip where I was traveling and investigating and went to New Orleans and looked at hoodoo, right? And so and then returned to IET and participated and witnessed different ceremonies that were taking place in the country, and then from that space returning to the mother, which voodoo in Benin is one of its traditional religions. And Benin is actually the only country on the continent of Africa that acknowledges their indigenous spiritual practices as an official religion, where banks are closed, schools are closed, and it's a paid holiday.
Interesting. And what date is that? Is it
January 10th.
January 10th.
January 10th.
And why is January 10th significant? What happened? Do we know?
That actual day of it being January 10th, I don't actually know. There are many ceremonies that happen, throughout many voodoo ceremonies that happen throughout the year. That's the day that it was made into an official holiday. Beninois might be able to tell you the better reason as to the depth of the reason for that date. But with that, there are many voodoo festivals that happen, and many people from all over the world come to Benin to bear witness. And so that's what I did. And so I was going to Benin after I had completed my investigations in Brooklyn and throughout America and all the way to IET, and then I returned to bear witness to the voodoo festival happening in Benin. And I was intending to stay 2 or 3 months, and ended up staying 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
And so for our listeners, Brooklyn to Benin, a voodoo pilgrimage, is on YouTube. You can watch it. It's very interesting. From that film, I want to ask a few questions. There are things in the film, like, for example, you say voodoo is about the connection with nature and the deity we have within ourselves. Yes. But can you explain a little bit about that?
So that there are many philosophies that exist in many religions that we are made in the image of God. Right? Yeah. That we are within ourselves a reflection of the Most High. So that is very much grounded in the philosophy within voodoo.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that we too are made in the image of the Most High. That we can do good and we can do bad. That we actually have been given choice. Right? That we can create and we can destroy. The same way that a cyclone can come and hit and devastate our brothers and sisters on the other side of the world, the same way that the earthquake came and destroyed and hundreds of thousands of people in IET died, there's also a place in which we can imitate nature in being able to destroy and to create. And that is the choice that humans have. The understanding of the connection to nature is in essence understanding what nature is, right? And understanding the water elements, understanding that we are both yin and yang, that we have the divine feminine and the divine masculine within ourselves. How we decide to use those elements. Are we a nurturing mother with our children, or are we very harsh and demanding, right? Where's the balance? At times it may have to be both, right? The role of a mother is not just one way, right? And so in that sense, it's about that balance. One of the things that I know that I mentioned was that voodoo is an action plan.
It's an action plan. That was going to be my next question.
Yes.
Because so if there is such a thing, then it's awesome.
So it's an action plan in that there's a space in which we as humans turn to those who have decided to dedicate their life to this form of belief. So whether we are going to the priest, that are at our churches, that are at our temples or shrines, or others in other places, we turn to those that have higher connection, that basically are in a perpetual state of fasting, right? Mm-hmm. They're perpetually in this state of a meditation. So whereas for those of us that are living our lives on the daily, rushing here and there, oh, I forgot to send this text, oh, I got to go to the bank, oh, I got to pick up the baby from the daycare, blah, 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 and we're doing all these things, that when we come in the company of those who are within that prayerful state, they can offer us counsel and wisdom. And that is in essence the wisdom that we receive from the Hugon or the Mambo or the priest, is that they will let us know this is what needs to happen. So if we're told that we need to fast, if we're told fasting from different things, it's not necessarily just fasting from food, right? Yeah. Fasting from particular association, that we need to go and bathe in a particular river every day for 1 week, right? Mm-hmm. It is an action plan in that you are given solution. The reason why it was a religion that had to be suppressed is because within that space it's not per se just one of submission to the highest will, but also that as a human that you can take action in your own salvation. That you are not just someone that someone's going to come and save you. You are actively engaged in your own salvation. And that is one of the most significant differences, is that there is a belief in self. We are calling on Almighty. We understand that there's a place where our power stops, right? Yeah. And that there is a greater power, right? And so in that space, in that connection, that is the submission that we have. And in that we are fulfilling what we are told that we need to do. Now, in this space, there are many people who are not practicing in goodwill. And unfortunately, that happens all over the world. There are many people who are afraid of voodoo because all that they see are, they just kill chickens, and there's just blood everywhere, and there's this, shrine with these things on it, and they pour blood on it, and this and that. And I think to myself, unfortunately, what some people don't understand is that if you go to a kosher deli, what does that mean? Do you know?
I can draw
or halal.
Halal.
Okay.
I can draw a parallel.
Yes.
In the sense that for halal meat, for example, or even like Ethiopians, for example, there are some Christians who do not eat meat in a Muslim household, only because the meat, let's say the sheep was killed by a Muslim person and so was not blessed by a Christian.
Yes.
But it does not negate the fact that the meat is meat.
Right.
If that meat was killed by a Christian in a Muslim household, I don't think they would have any problems eating that.
Right.
In fact, with Ethiopians, one of the interesting cultures is that, for example, you have a big wedding, and the community is invited. You have Muslims, you have Christians, everybody is there, and so if the person that is hosting the wedding is a Muslim, then he would have a Christian neighbor come in and prepare the Christian food.
Yes.
But the thing is, you're celebrating together.
Yes.
You're sitting together, you're
Absolutely.
eating, you're dining together. It's just the fact that respecting the tradition of that section of your community and making sure that they're comfortable in rejoicing with you.
Absolutely. And so in essence,
the fact does not the sacrifice is there. It's just
exactly
done by somebody else.
Right. Exactly. That's really the whole point, right? So whether it's kosher or halal or whatever the names are, in essence, what it means that before the animal is killed, it is prayed over, and that is what happens within the voodoo tradition. That's it. That's it, folks. C'est ça seulement. That's it. That's the same thing. Okay. So, but because of faith and people's traditions, and they say, well, I'm a Christian, I can only eat Christian blessed meat. I'm a Muslim, I can only eat halal. Right? Because what we're invoking is that the prayers that are done over this animal are in fitting with my faith. And that is what voodoo in those sacrifices that we often see but are not explained, and that are often from a Western gaze and are demonized into some perversion of what someone else is thinking it is. The perversion of blood. Imagine any slaughterhouse is filled with blood. If I went into a place where the prayers are made before the slaughter, and that's all that I showed to the rest of the world about Ethiopia, what would the world think? Really, I mean, think about it. For those of us that are carnivores, we've made that choice, and we understand that an animal was killed. We wear our leather, we enjoy it, we eat meat, we may fast or this and that, but yet those images are not circulated all over the world.
Yeah.
Right?
You don't see them.
Exactly,
but
they happen.
Yeah.
And so what happens is you're looking at a culture that has been misappropriated, that has stories that have been told that are not true. Because who's telling them?
Not the people that are practicing.
Exactly. Always consider that. The same way that it is important for you as an Ethiopian to be here on this land and to have this position that you have and to speak your voice, that is empowering and significant and necessary. So how can it not be for the rest of the world? How can it not be that for Haitians or for the Beninois or for the Angolan or for those others whose stories have been taken and have been manipulated? Isn't it time that we tell our own story so that it can be finally known? And so that's the crux of my work, is that space in which we have to be active when we're thinking about what is social justice. Why is this significant? Why is sharing this narrative a part of cultural diversity? Why is this relevant? Because there are people around the world who are merely oppressed. They're oppressed merely based upon the concepts that someone else has told you. You've never seen it for yourself, but yet you can talk negatively about people all day, but you've never met them or don't know their tradition.
Yeah, that is true. I want to go back to one thing you mentioned earlier, and that is hoodoo, and how it relates or does not relate to voodoo, and what it is, what it's not, and
the spelling
of voodoo as well.
Okay, so basically hoodoo is like the daughter of voodoo.
Okay.
Right? And it's particular to the southern parts of the United States. With the influence of language, right? Like in the sense of how things change. If you have any family members that live, that are Ethiopian, but they live in the States, you start to find that they speak an Amharic English. And everything gets mixed up, and everybody over there can get it and understand it. But once they come to Ethiopia, they realize that they don't know as much as Amharic as they think they do.
Or they use the wrong words of Amharic.
Exactly.
And unless you speak English, you don't really understand what they're trying to say.
Right? So in essence, when we think about the survival of culture transforms. Yes. Because the one thing that is permanent is change. Change is the only permanent in the world. And so in that, it shifted, right? And so it became what survived in the South wasn't necessarily the reverence to the deities, but the practice of solutions. Okay. So hoodoo is much more grounded in the solution that someone may have. If someone is concerned about a particular issue in their family or whatever, there may be solutions that are said, whether or not you believe them. If some people say, oh my God, what are you talking about? Go to the river, do this, do that, those different types of things. But that is part of the tradition. The other thing that's important is that voodoo, black spiritual traditions, are how most black people in the Americas survived slavery. Because within that tradition, there was also an understanding of herbs. understanding of what salve to put on the body after the white European had beaten you so bad that you're almost close to death. Who came and healed you? Do you think that they sent the doctor? Do you think that anybody cared about you as a black person? You were a commodity. You were just that. If you died, they'd just go get another. But who cared for you were the herbalists, those that understood. And so with that understanding, it can also be misused. In that understanding, that study of alchemy, right? Is of nature.
All comes back to nature.
All comes down to nature. And also want us to consider the space in which, how did people who came to a land that they did not know, did not necessarily know those herbs or plants, how did they survive? A big part of that is because they received wisdom and counsel in their dreams. In their dreams, their ancestors would speak to them. Someone is going into labor. Who's the midwife? It's the elder woman. It's her that has to keep the knowledge that has been passed on from generations. The languages are being spoken, invoked, prayers are being made. And many people say, I don't know what she said. I don't know what the old woman said. But every time I have a baby, she goes and she blesses the baby. The significance of voodoo and black spirit traditions in America is significant in that all black people descended from those that had their hands in there, and helped them to survive the cruelty of slavery, the cruelty of Jim Crow, the cruelty in places that we were not allowed. If you can think that there are still places around the world where a black person cannot enter, a black body is seen as a threat. Who cares for you? Who loves you? Who's going to make sure that you are all right? So the tea that you drink, the salve that's put on your body, for the traditions of women and after having labor and wrapping the woman, all these traditions, do you think it was European women who came and said, well, this is what you do? Who do you think did that? Who cared?
And that's, I think, is also the crux of how voodoo survived.
That is. And it is basically what the reason why voodoo survives is about love. At the core, whatever it is that you may think, because of the stories that you've been told, and because also people have done negative things with it. But what's interesting to me is that you can have these stories about voodoo and black magic, quote, right? And people are afraid of it, but yet you have global powers that can drop bombs, and you don't see that as a threat. But yet we can talk about voodoo and be afraid of voodoo, but yet you're not concerned about this. I'm sorry. You have your priorities out of order, my friend. Because what we're talking about is neighbor against neighbor. We're talking about small things. Let me know, tell me, at the core, of course, we had to pull on that history, that tradition. We had to call on all those spirits to be able to push forward for our independence. Right? And so in that space, after our independence, people then could decide, oh, I want to be Catholic, or I want to be this. Haiti has every single religion in the world there. And yet, who's oppressed in Haiti today are the voodooism.
Really?
Because you have the Protestant, you have the Catholic, you have everybody around the world, and everybody around the world is telling you that this is bad. After the earthquake in Haiti, you have, a religious leader saying, oh, Haiti, that happened to Haiti because it was cursed. Because they made a pact with the devil. They made a pact with the devil for their independence. Yes, you could just look it up. This is what was said after the earthquake in Haiti. You had religious leaders around the world saying that this was what Haiti deserved because Haiti fought for its independence.
One last thing I want to ask you about is the Wawawa Diaspora Center.
Yes.
You started that.
Yes.
What is it and why?
Okay, so the Wawawa Diaspora Center was created while I was in Benin, in my unexpected 2 years of living in West Africa. And Wa is a Fon word, Fon, F-O-N, a language spoken in West Africa, in Benin and Togo, mostly in Benin, and it means come. So it basically means come, diaspora. Okay. And part of the work that the intention of the Wawawa Diaspora Center is specifically to address the healing from the trauma of the transatlantic experience, slave experience, specifically catered to the black descendants, because there's trauma on all sides.
Yeah.
It's not just black people who are traumatized by this. Europeans are also traumatized by it with a false sense of superiority. They're also traumatized by it, by their inability to have compassion and understanding. The fact that enslaved people had to fight for their freedom, and then after that have to endure Jim Crow. And I'm talking about specifically the Americas, because that's where I lived, right? And had to continue to deal with places in which they were not allowed to move in society. They were not allowed to vote. They were not allowed to become fully engaged individuals. The Constitution of the United States listed blacks as 3/5 human beings. That is in the law. I'm not making this up. Okay, so I'm not talking shit here. Okay, pardon, sorry. I'm not talking crap. This is in the laws of the country. So if you have that within the law of the country, what is in the psychology of the individual? Dr. Joy DeGruy wrote this book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And what she talks about is the trauma that exists not only for those that have black and brown skin, but for those on the other side, because it affected everyone. For me, my work is centered on the healing for those to come and to break the spell. Because it was a spell. The words that we cast when we say black is bad, that's a spell that you've cast. Whether you believe in magic or not, every single time that you talk negatively about your neighbor, you're casting a spell. Every time that you praise them, every time you know your faith, that's a positive, right?
Energy. Yeah.
Energy, positive energy. And so for me, part of the healing from this 400 years of trauma is to return to the land and to make peace for those ancestors that were taken against their will. To light candles for them.
I said that was going to be my last question, but I was really interested when we were talking earlier about the barracoon, the last cargo.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about that,
Absolutely.
what it is, and how it came about.
Okay, so Zora Neale Hurston, as I mentioned earlier, my spiritual godmother, one of her last books was The Barracoon, The Last Black Cargo. It was refused to get printed by I think it's printed now by Viking Press. And basically, the story of the last black cargo of Barracoon is of Kojo Kazula Lewis, who was a captured African in 1860. And I'll just go back a little bit. So the law in the United States in 1807 prohibited the importation of captured Africans. That was the law that meant, okay, we still have slavery, but we can no longer bring any more black people. We can't bring any more people and enslave them. That was the law, and it was like, okay, we're going to stop. Because the movement that was happening at that time was toward abolition, toward the ending. It was kind of, now, even though it was Christians, they were all Christians who were engaged in the slave trade. I just want you to know they called themselves Christians, but their actions were unchristlike. Okay, so they were Christians. But there were others who now began to see, and they visited, some of them maybe pastors or people who started to go to these plantations and started to see, wait a minute, I was wrong. Like, this isn't right. And so some of the movement that started happening on the part of the West, but I have to say that there was always a movement of liberation amongst captured people.
Yeah. As it may.
Always.
Yeah,
okay.
But the oppression existed.
Exactly.
But there was a sort of a turning of the tide.
Exactly, in the sense of for the West.
For the West.
But as captured Africans, we always knew, okay, as black people, that it was never right.
Of course.
Right, you know what I'm saying? Like, okay, so y'all, it has taken y'all a long damn time to come to this realization, okay? But we, feeling the brunt of this, we knew from the beginning it wasn't right. But now, hundreds of years later. So what happened was that this law in 1807 was enacted, but there were many people that were continuing to break the law. And the government was very slack in persecuting. Okay, really, to be quite honest, there were so many things going on. They might take them to court, they might not. So Meeherd, a wealthy plantation owner in Mobile, Alabama, who was actually from, I believe he was from Massachusetts, or he was from the north, and he had moved down to Alabama. He placed a bet that he could continue to bring slaves
without repercussions.
Although
it was illegal.
Exactly, even though it was illegal.
Okay.
And so he had a ship built. He hired a captain, Captain Foster, to go and to sail to Ouida. And Ouida was still the place, if you can imagine, 1860, Ouida, Benin, still engaged in the slave trade. Still. And sent a ship, a small ship, and it wasn't typically made in the size, okay, of the transatlantic slave trade ships, which had a very big belly, right? Because the bottom of the ship is the hold, right? So this ship was made in a way that it was actually considered to be one of the best and fastest of the time. Okay, very well made. Captain Foster goes to Ouida, meets with the king, and purchases 110 people. One of those persons was Kojo Kozula Lewis, and he was brought to the United States in 1860 as a young man.
Okay.
Zora Neale Hurston.
1807 to 1860, still.
Exactly, still the import of captured Africans against their will, breaking the law. Now, Meher was brought up against charges, but it was thrown out because they couldn't find proof, because they burned the ship. National Geographic last year said that they thought that they had found, that it was an article in National Geographic, you can look it up, that they think that they had found the remains of the Clotilde. The name of the ship was the Clotilda, right? And so this ship brought 110 Africans that were immediately privately sold off to landowners, right? Yeah. So Meher's also making money from that. Yeah. Now he's selling off, hush, hush. They burn the ship. In the Bay of Mobile, Bay, they burn the ship, and then they kind of go on with their lives. 5 years later, emancipation comes for enslaved people. So 5 years later, Kojo Kozula Lewis is a free man. He's a free man, but he's a free man in a community of blacks who hate themselves. Black people oppress of hundreds of years of slavery that they themselves do not understand who they are. And so the blacks in the community that he's in see him as the African, as savages. Call him and his children, you're not Christian, then you're not God, you're not a God-fearing man. You can't live with this woman, you didn't get married in the church. And he says, well, my African way, the way that we get married is we do this. This is how we. But he didn't want to be in a place where he was in division with his community. So he joined the church.
Assimilated.
Yes. So part of the process was to be able to survive and to be in community is a certain level of assimilation.
Yes. Compromise.
And compromise. But within that space, he also was very clear that he was a proud African. And so it's a story that speaks to the experience that many continental Africans have upon arriving in America, and the disconnect that exists between Africans on the continent who have descended from the transatlantic slave trade and those that are new immigrants coming in feeling like they want to be able to come and live in America. There are stories that are told to those Africans about the African Americans, and then there's stories that are told to the African Americans about the continental Africans. And until we begin to have conversations and openness and really begin to understand each other's history, then what we do is we continue to inflict wounds and deepen the trauma and the lack of trust that exists.
Against each other.
Against each other. And then who wins from that? Who wins from that when we can't really look at each other and see that we're all connected? We're all connected in the human experience, right? But this thing called blackness, this thing that is often maligned as negative, there's a tremendous work that needs to be done in reshifting and opening up ourselves and being able to see ourselves as gods on earth. We're made in the image of God, so why should we be bad? Why is blackness bad? There's a video of Muhammad Ali that I love, right? And he basically is sitting with an interviewer and he's talking about, and he's like, I always used to ask my mother, why is everything good white? You know, like why is this and everything bad black? You know, like, you know, and he just started going into it. You can find it online, and really what he was speaking to in this very eloquent way is that part of the reason why the world loved Muhammad Ali and stood with him when he was facing all the tribulation, when he decided not to go and fight in the Vietnam War, is because he was very proud of himself. And he didn't push back who he was to be accepted by the larger Western society. And in that space, I feel Ethiopia also stands in that way. Ethiopia stands very much on the vanguard of a shift that's happening in Africa. A shift that's happening in the sense of consciousness and awareness, right? And so that's a movement. It's a movement that needs to keep growing.
Yeah. Moving it forward. And this is where Wawa Diaspora Center also comes.
Exactly.
To continue
in that
this
space.
conversation. Yes.
Exactly.
Anything else you want to highlight for me before we sign off?
Okay, let's see.
For our audience. I'm hogging you, I'm sorry.
Well, there's I don't know. I would say, well, one thing I would say is that if you use Instagram or social media, you can find me on LinkedIn, Régine Romain. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. My website is regineromain.com. And I'm not sure. I haven't given up. I'd love to still be able to show my 2 films here in Benin while I'm here. But I would just love
the films from Benin.
Yeah,
at the Addis Film.
Festival. Or there or elsewhere. I'm not sure. But you know, I wasn't even aware of the film festival. But I'm like, I want to show my work. How can I wait? You know. But I just want to say that I think that we're in a space of transformation at this time. We're in a space of transformation. It's important that we take our stand as we look at what's happening around the world, whether we're looking from Sudan or we're looking wherever. It is important to recognize the voice of the people. And the voice of the people is deeply entrenched also within our culture. It's important to recognize the voice of women. Women are significant because they are the first teacher. And if we continue to not allow women to move into their rightful place as leaders, then our countries continue to be underdeveloped. So what I encourage us as Africans and as people in the diaspora to consider is, how do we love our women? And how do we celebrate our blackness? And how are we promoting and pushing forward this movement of justice, of reparations? And from that space, we can then move into peace. But first, we have to be able to embrace that with justice, there must come reparations. And from that space, we'll be able to move into peace.
Thank you. So I wish it was not just an hour that we had. Thank you so very much for being on Real Talk USA.
Thank you for allowing me. And I realize that this talk may not have been talk that you were expecting. But it's real talk.
It's real talk.
It's real talk, folks. It's real talk. Hashtag real talk.
Hashtag real talk. And hashtag Black Girl Magic.
That's it, exactly. Hashtag Black Girl Magic. Peace and blessings to you all. I think I came at a wonderful time of Easter. Yes. And so may that spirit of being reborn ignite all of us to move forward in love and in light.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Real Talk USA, brought to you by the U.S. Mission to the African Union. Have a great evening, everyone.
Real Talk USA.
It's my house, come on, turn it up.
The hour where the U.S. mission to the African Union comes to you through Afro FM 105.3 to highlight the United States partnership in Africa. Current issues will be discussed. Guests will engage on a variety of topics ranging from politics to jazz. Co-hosted by Afro FM and Chris Meade of USAU. The show will air every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. Feel free to participate by sending messages to the USAU social media sites, www.usau.usmission.gov or www.facebook.com/USAU and follow USAU on twitter.com/USAU.
Just relax. Welcome to my house.
Real Talk USA.
Welcome to my house. It's my house.